And I'm Charles Gibson. Partners in crime, we are right here at our usual post.
Partners in crime.
But isn't in America and in politics, isn't spinning? What is spinning, Charlie?
Well, spinning is getting out your point of view, trying to put your interpretation on something.
So do you think there is a lot of spinning done in politics and various other places?
Sure.
Well,
sure. But do you think this one is spun correctly?
We want to tell you what we know as we know it, but we just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at the World Trade Center in New York City.
I want to show that to you and to our audience. Let's just watch. The first plane smashing into the World Trade Center. We've seen video throughout the day of the second plane that went into the World Trade Center.
I've heard about those sonic booms, and I got up to my window. I live in Battery Park City, right next to the Twin Towers. I live in Battery Park City, right next to the Twin Towers. I live in Battery Park City, right next to the Twin Towers.
But these two buildings are essentially cities in and of themselves. But these two buildings are essentially cities in and of themselves. I mean, but these two buildings are essentially cities in and of themselves. I mean,
and I looked up, and the side of the World Trade, and I looked up, and the side of the World Trade Center exploded right when I looked up, and at that point, debris started falling. I couldn't believe what I was watching.
Can you hear anything from your position right now? Ambulances, sirens? Hear anything from your position right now? Ambulances, sirens?
Absolutely.
Can you see any actual people in that area who may have been hit by any of this debris or were not able to get out of the way? Can you see any crowds that may be too close to where they should be? Anything like that?
No, I don't think so. And it's not a highly trafficked area at the base of the World Trade Center, so that's one fortunate thing.
Jean, right now we're continuing to look at pictures of this devastating scene according to...
It appeared to bank sharply and smash directly, perhaps purposefully, into, oh my goodness.
Oh God.
There's another one. Oh my goodness, there's another one.
This seems to be on purpose.
Oh my goodness, now it's obvious, I think, that there's a second plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. I think we have a terrorist act of proportions that we cannot begin to imagine at this juncture.
Oh, my God.
My goodness. A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center. Obviously, suicide, terrorist attack on the World Trade Center.
Amateur video, the plane coming, and now no words, no reason.
I think we all have struggled today with a way to define.
Amateur video, the plane coming, and now no words, no reason.
I think we all have struggled today.
It took such a loss of life and a shock to the American people to do so. But I think as we look back from some perspective of history, September the 11th, 2001 will be the turning of a page in the history of
New York, and also it will attack the Pentagon, which is supposed to be very, very secure.
now, how do you think the Americans are going to react now? I mean, judging on past
News of that second plane crash. There it is. Oh my God.
Oh my God!
News of that second plane crash. There it is. Oh my God.
Oh my God! Jesus fucking Christ!
That's.
It's unreal.
It's just.
Oh my God!
A ball of flame envelops the second of the World Trade Center.
The ABC's Jim Fish has the latest information.
We are now getting more information about what may have happened, may have led up to these incidents, these attacks.
CBS Early Morning News when this happened. And they broke into regular programming, and while we were on the air live, we saw that happen. A second plane, believed to be Flight 11, American Airlines, from Boston.
Second tower.
Here's the second one.
Right, over and over since yesterday, but now we're getting more video.
For your leading suspect, that's Osama bin Laden.
And for Americans who had, I guess, enjoyed some sense of security, thinking that perhaps Osama bin Laden and his organizers and compatriots were up. Osama bin Laden and his organizers and compatriots
over the telephone.
So in other words, Senator Shelby, I know you agree with Senator Graham that we need to invest much more in people.
A guy was with me in the shop, and he was down on the ground and he started to cry. I says, listen, you didn't, I says, you get hurt? He says, no. I says, well, if you're not hurt, stop the crying. We got to get our act together. We got to get out of here. He says, I says, I can't walk because I'm shot. So he says, where are we going to go? I said, we're going to get out of here. So I crawl on my left side.
Did you grasp what you were seeing, what the camera was recording?
There was no way I could possibly grasp what I was seeing. I just saw a flash come in on the left of the frame. I saw an airplane. I could identify it as an airplane.
Plane took off about 8 o'clock out of Logan in Boston on its way to Los Angeles, climbed to 29,000 feet and cruising at about 450 knots. About that time, 8:28, the flight took an immediate hard left turn due south.
That was a description of what happened to Flight 11, which was the first one to come into the towers. And just looking at the timing, it's interesting. The plane took off at exactly 8 o'clock from Logan Airport in Boston, and it was at 8:28 that it took that hard left-hand turn and then crashed into the World Trade Center at about 8:45. So that means for 17 minutes, some air traffic controller had to know that they had a rogue aircraft on their hands heading for New York City. The other flight, the one that went into the second World Trade Center, and that was United Flight 175, a 767 that had taken off for Boston for Los Angeles, took off at 8:15, basically doing a U-turn over New Jersey and slammed into the to the building at 9:03. So again, for a considerable period of time, the air traffic controllers had to know that they had not one but two rogue aircrafts heading for New York. That there was a level of sophistication on the part of these hijackers that was pretty great. That not only is a very simple signal that can be sent from the planes to indicate that a flight has been hijacked. That signal, she has reported, did not come from either plane, and that indeed the transponders on the plane, the equipment on the plane that sends out information about the plane's height and its speed and whatever, had been turned off on the plane, and that obviously indicates a lot of sophistication on the part of these pilots, or the part of these hijackers. They knew what they were doing when they got the controls of these planes.
Yes, it's a 4-digit hijack code, and shocking to everybody that they could not place it, so something had been done to the plane ahead of time.
Whoever is behind this put together an incredibly sophisticated program. Just the idea that you would have multiple operators in multiple cities with the ability to get onto a plane with either the weaponry or false weaponry or explosives to be able to pull off a hijacking, again, probably with a locked cockpit.
3 of them, maybe.
Again, a hijacking and another hijacking and another, and maybe one that's still aloft, that you would be able to, and this is the part that has confounded me, and you touched on this, how do you make a pilot in a plane full of passengers into a suicide pilot, a kamikaze to slam into a building? And if you do not, how do you, as the terrorist, have the level of sophistication to take over the controls of a sophisticated airliner jet plane to be able to fly accurately into targets like hitting dead center into the Pentagon, which is a low building?
You heard John McCarthy saying knocking off telephone poles, knocking down telephone poles as it came along.
Dead hits into the World Trade Center, one at the center, one near the top. As you pointed out, there's a lot of mystery to this, confounding mystery, an incredible scope.
Well, Peter, I'm going to give you kind of a pool report from several of our correspondents down here of basically what happened down here in downtown New York between 9:45 and 10:45 when the two explosions and the collapse of the World Trade Center happened. At the time, I was actually in the subway heading towards the World Trade Center right around Franklin Street, and after the first explosion, the subway station started to fill with smoke. The subway cars started to fill with smoke, and the subways actually stopped.
Did you see what happened? What happened?
Well, I was in the PATH train, and there was a huge explosion sound. Everyone came out.
We went down to the PATH train, which is like 2 levels below what you see right up here.
Did you see what happened? What happened?
Well, I was in the PATH train, and there was a huge explosion sound. Everyone came out. A large section of the building is blown out, around like the 80th floor.
When you exited the subway station due to a lack of smoke, Eileen?
It was very smoky, and then we exited on Church Street out of the PATH train station. I crossed over to Church.
They were having coffee in the World Trade Center when the first plane struck.
And all of a sudden it sounded like, I don't know where the subway is, but it sounded like a subway collision, a bomb, and it was just pounding, boom, 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 and I literally thought the subway had exploded and all the cars were fixing to land on top of us. It was so loud.
In Tower 1, the North Tower of the World Trade Center, Matt.
And actually, when we came out of the stairs, there was a lot of devastation in the lobby.
I was entering the building on the lobby level. I was in the revolving doors when the plane hit the building.
David Dre worked in number 1 World Trade Center.
One of the elevators, I think, came crashing to the lobby level, and all this debris came flying out of it. And a fireball emerged from the elevator lobby and was coming toward me.
It just went ba-boom. It was like a bomb went off, and it was like holy hell coming down them stairs. And then when we finally got to the bottom, they were coming out on a mezzanine level there, and another explosion came right from it. Just everyone flying right in front of me. Everything just went boom.
I was standing next to One World Trade Center, and then all of a sudden I heard rumbling, and we all started running away from it. The glass blew out and threw me onto the sidewalk, and I couldn't see for 20 seconds.
Bottom elevator, the glass just flames exploded out the front of the World Trade Center. Glass flew everywhere.
Big boom, come down the steps, everything fine till we got to the basement, and then everything just fell in. I got trapped under there with another guy, crawled out, kept getting hit in the head, had bags thrown around. Finally, we clawed our way out over the rubble.
Yeah.
Come on down.
We did all right. All right, way to be, Tom. Let's go.
Witnesses spoke of how eerily calm the survivors, even the injured, appeared to be.
And all of a sudden, it was this big explosion. I don't know if it's just like what you just seen. That's what we went through before we came out of the building. Then when we get out the building, then another smoke cloud came. We had to go through that smoke cloud again. We saw a shadow. It looked like a plane. Next thing we know, it was boom, boom, and the floor started shaking. And then we saw debris fall down. And next thing we know, we had to get out of the building. We stuck on the stairs for a while. We finally got down to the lobby. Then we get to the lobby, it was this big explosion.
So I was real lucky. I don't know what happened to the people behind me when that blast occurred.
I asked him what happened. What was amazing about his story was that he was in the lobby of World Trade Center 1 when the first plane hit. And when the debris started coming down, he went back to go into the building to protect himself and was in the revolving doors going back in off West Street when he looked up and a fireball came flying out, I guess from the elevator shafts, that's what he seemed to believe, and blew out all the windows and threw him back onto the street. And obviously, in a fire flash, seared all his skin.
She's able to hear me. Hillary, I gotta go.
They're pulling him away. Let me tell you what's happening. They're pulling him away. They're taking away Lieutenant Sam Esposito, who was an off-duty officer just now.
Ladies.
A paper's block away, came running out of the office when he saw what was happening, and has told us a very compelling story. We were trying to get him on tape. He really should not have been out of the hospital, but said he actually needed a cup of coffee, and that's why he walked out. But his story was that he ran in. He went into the daycare center, which really hasn't been mentioned very much, on the second floor of one of the World Trade Center buildings. And the good news, he said, was there was nobody in that center, but he made his way up. He pulled people out with him as they resisted, and then there was an explosion. He said car exploding outside, knocked him unconscious, and he was rescued himself by a firefighter brought here to St. Vincent. So a very compelling story. I wish he could have told it for himself, but you may have seen he wasn't, I guess according to the hospital, in the condition to be outside. Back to you.
clear things up, I wasn't in the building. I was in the World Financial Center, which is directly behind it.
Anything else you know that you'd like to add?
Just as I was coming out of the building, I heard somebody sort of ushering people away, and they were saying, you guys got to get out of here, it's a bomb.
Many thanks, Lindsey Grimm.
Let's just get back. Get back. You with me, John?
They just think there's going to be another explosion.
I was in B tower.
B tower?
A tower.
What floor were you on?
B1.
What floor?
The first one.
What happened? Tell me.
When a big explosion happened, some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Anything else that you saw? Were you there for the second hit by the plane?
About 10 minutes later, the second building went off.
Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. A big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere. Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement. Came down. All of a sudden, the elevator blew up. Smoke. I dragged the guy out. His skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
Arthur Del Bianco is one of the lucky few, able to tell a tale of survival from a hospital bed.
All of a sudden, it was like bang, 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 like bullet shots. And then all of a sudden, 3 tremendous explosions. And everything started coming down.
I was in the B4 level. I was assigned to the B3 level. But I had to do something in the B4 sheet metal shop. So I went in the sheet metal shop, do what I had to do. And on my way, I heard a bomb. So I says, probably the transformer again blew up. So I stepped back, finished what I had to finish, and I started towards the door again. And there come a big blast with a big ball of fire. And that's when I got hit. It hit me right back down on the ground.
I have talked to people who are inside the building, one of them, Fran Martin, who is the aunt of someone who works here at ABC, and she was saying that the first experience inside the building was that earthquake-like feeling a number of people have mentioned, and then something else in an eerie silence.
I work on the building 1, the one that got hit the first time.
Tell me what happened.
I was on the basement, which is a support floor for the maintenance company, and we hear like a big rumble, not like an impact, like a rumble, like something like moving furniture on a massive way, and all of a sudden we hear another rumble, and a guy comes running into our office, and all his skin was off his body. All his skin, we went crazy, we started screaming, we told him to get out.
On the 6th floor, and I was reviewing some work, and it was about 10 to 9, and the building shook. And I felt it was an earthquake, and it didn't bother me because I felt the building could sustain earthquakes. They were built for that. And then there was a huge explosion, and the ceiling fell. And I got out of that conference room.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Essentially, I was, sort of at my desk working, general office activity, and felt an enormous, I almost felt like an earthquake. Like I could literally feel and see things in the office moving and the floor moving. I was on 36, so it wasn't too terrible.
I was on the 28th floor of number 7 World Trade, working in the southeastern corner.
Okay, what did you hear?
At around 8:40, you heard a tremendous explosion, followed by what felt like an earthquake rumble.
The initial instinct was that something hit us. First, it was a question of, is this an earthquake? Imagine, if you will, being on top of a telephone pole and just having a truck at top speed just slam into that telephone pole. That's exactly what it felt like.
Was the building, I mean, those are solid buildings, was it moving?
It shook for about a second or two. It actually did move substantially. We did a little search for about 5 minutes out in the hallways, which it's strange, the hallways in the center of the floor were devastated. Not so much the outside office areas of the side that I was on.
And you were on the 73rd floor when you heard something happen in the tower where Bill was, right? What?
Yeah. More or less,
a big shake, like an earthquake, like you said, occurred?
Actually, it's interesting. There's no way to characterize any part of this as fortunate, but if you look at cities who are prepared to handle an incident like this, and as you've seen New York's emergency response to this, it is probably one of the few places that is prepared with the kind of equipment, response, and rescue efforts that could actually address something like this, and Washington is probably the other. Immediately when this happened, the entire emergency service unit, which comprises hundreds of specially trained cops, was mobilized to the scene. Now a triage center for the injured has been set up just around the corner from the World Trade Center. It's an incredible scene down there with a tremendous amount of equipment.
The Federal Aviation Administration has actually gone even further than it did a few minutes ago. It was asking all planes not to take off. Now the FAA has ordered all aircraft currently in the air over the United States to land at the nearest airport. Now you can imagine what may be happening, or what they think might be happening in some part of the country, that there is somebody else on some aircraft coming from somewhere or going somewhere with evil intentions, and so all aircraft currently in the air over the United States have been ordered to land at the nearest airport.
I think what you're going to see...
Hang on just a second, I just want to check one thing, because one of the very first people the President talked to was the director of the FBI, and Pierre Thomas, who covers the Justice Department and the FBI for us, has been here. They may think they prepare for this kind of thing, Pierre, but man, it must have been a shock.
Stunning shock. The FBI Special Operations Center is now in full alert. The FBI extremely concerned that there would be additional attacks. Normally when you have a situation like this, they immediately get on the line with the CIA, the various intelligence agencies, trying to get a sense of who might have been planning something.
Peter, it's Don Daly down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
Thanks very much,
completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
That's the southern tower you're talking about.
There has just been a huge explosion. We can see a billowing smoke rising, and I'll tell you that I can't see that second tower, but there was a cascade of sparks and fire. The second tower, which in fact was the first one hit, collapsed as well, and that's what you're about to see. Our reporters in the area say they heard loud noises when that happened. It is unclear to them and to us whether those were explosions going on in the building or if that was simply the sound of the collapse.
Appearing to fall away from the rest of the building. Can we go to the tape now? Here we go, right here. This is, I mean, when you look at it, the building has collapsed. That tower just came down.
Let's go to Bob Bazell, who is at St. Vincent's Hospital. Bob, what's going on there? What can you tell us?
Tell me what you saw.
Well, on the corner of Duane and West Broadway, walking down towards the Twin Towers, and it just collapsed. It looked like it looked sort of like the building just demolished. Smoke, clouds, clouds of smoke everywhere.
Towers, Minna?
Yes, hi, Matt.
Tell me what you saw.
Well, on the corner of Duane and West Broadway, walking down towards the Twin Towers, and it just collapsed. It looked like it looked sort of like the building just demolished. Smoke, clouds, clouds of smoke everywhere. People running towards me. I was going towards the Twin Towers. People were going away from the towers.
I saw a live picture of what seemed to be a portion of the building falling away from the World Trade Center. I saw a live picture of what seemed to be a portion of the building falling away from the World Trade Center.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the 2 towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
Even just on a plain windy day, that this material blew through in a way that was really unimaginable. It was truly frightening. It continued to rain down for several minutes, as you can see there, and the winds just whipped through these corridors for several minutes. Eventually...
It's a big plane, but it must be an observation plane. It must be a fire plane. And I thought of the wildfires out west. Maybe it's bringing in water, you know, to fight the fire in the building. Maybe it's bringing in water, you know, to fight the fire in the building. The concept that it was going to hit the tower is so foreign to all of us that you couldn't believe what you were seeing. And I still didn't believe it after it happened. Diane?
Less than an hour later, the South Tower came crumbling down. It collapsed! Less than an hour later, the South Tower came crumbling down. It collapsed!
Back now on Eyewitness News with a look at the latest video from Tuesday's tragedy in Manhattan, the now familiar scene of the World Trade Center Twin Towers collapsing.
CBS reported just moments ago.
They are now concerned about the possibility of a second collapse.
I'm still desperately confused, John, about what may have caused the building to collapse.
As you watch the videotape, it appeared to buckle from the middle, from the point of impact and collapse, which, not, you know, with no background in architecture, I don't know about the structural vulnerability, but as you see, debris starts to
peel
fall,
away.
Then it cracks, and then it just goes straight down.
But the entire, at least as far as I can see, the top half of the building, at least half of it, I can't see below that, half of it just started with a gigantic rumble, folded in on itself, and collapsed in a huge plume of smoke and dust.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
Peter?
Yes, Dan.
What appeared to happen from my vantage point, the top part of the building was totally involved in fire, and there appeared to be no effort possible to put that fire out. It looked like the top part of the building was so weakened by the fire that the weight of it collapsed the rest of the building. That's what appeared to happen. I did not see anything happening at the base of the building. It all appeared to start at the top and then just collapse the rest of the building by the sheer weight of the top. There was no explosion or anything at the base part of it, but I did see that the top part of it started to collapse. The walls started to bulge out, bricks, glass things coming out, and then it collapsed in on itself, and it appeared to just fold down from there, from the very top.
Thanks, Don, very much.
Did you see either one of the buildings collapse?
Yes, I did. About 10 to 20 blocks up, I stopped to catch my breath. I turned and looked around, and the Southern World Trade Center began to just buckle. About 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall.
See, but you could hear the steel bending. You could hear
the second tower hit has collapsed, and now that's the second tower, and we believe that was the one hit higher up. We do not control this camera; it is from New York City, but the Associated Press is reporting that the second tower has collapsed. We don't know if that's a complete collapse, a partial collapse, or whatever. We hope to see it soon. Once again, you're looking at Tower 2, and this was the first one hit just after 9 o'clock this morning.
The collapse certainly would not be a surprise given the level of damage in the fire and the fact that firefighters were unable to fight that fire because it happened so high up on the building. So it certainly would not be surprising if there is a collapse, partial or total.
And I don't think our reaction was that the buildings would fall, and that's why we maintained under the pedestrian overpass, which is only about 100, maybe 150 yards from the first building.
I don't think anybody was thinking the buildings might fall. We'd been told that these buildings were tested for 707 and all of that. I mean, good grief, of course we didn't think it was going to fall. The fire trucks and the cops were right under there. As that thing started to collapse,
when it began to come down, as you've heard Commissioner Safer indicate, the bomb squad was in, fire personnel, ambulance personnel had entered. About 15 minutes after they made their entry, we heard a boom. I don't know if that was the infrastructure that was going or another explosion, and we looked up, and it, I can't even describe it. It's not even like a movie. It was so surreal. It just came towering towards us.
To the catastrophe that have been blasted to pieces, thrown over on their sides, and burned. There are a number of U.S. postal vehicles in the street that have literally, Dan, just melted. U.S. postal trucks that have melted in the street. There is a large bus, could be a city bus, might be a kind of a Greyhound bus. Impossible to tell because it has been completely burned completely burned away and is sitting just in the middle of West Broadway. As I reported to you earlier, the street is thick with several inches of muck that is made of construction material and files and paperwork.
Unified in their attempt to strike back, but also try to put salve on the national psyche so we don't become an armed camp resisting an enemy we really can't identify and never know when is striking.
Because the consequences psychologically for this country are every bit as great as they are physically for America as well. It is worth pointing out, I suppose, that we all breathed a great sigh of relief when the Cold War came to an end with the collapse of communism. And yet there was nothing as devastating as this for this country during that long, cold twilight that we faced down communism in Moscow with its considerable nuclear arsenal, which it still has in place, obviously.
You know, Tom, it's a very important point because all during this past few weeks, the debate about missile defense systems
were the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. In that debris, there may very well be some people alive at this moment. Efforts are being made to determine that. Authorities have been trying to evacuate those who work in this whole area of the Twin Towers. Many people are thought to have been trapped. About 50,000 people work at the Trade Center. American Airlines said that its 2 aircraft known to have been hijacked were carrying a total of 156 people. Fate of those people unknown, but one has to believe that many, if not all of them, are dead.
North Tower, Peter.
Let's look at the North Tower quickly,
seems
quickly.
to be coming down.
Oh my God.
The second tower.
Oh, it's hard to put it into words anymore because that's not a live picture anymore. Good Lord, it just... monitors the city and all its vulnerable points, said when this whole thing began this morning they could not get an immediate handle on precisely what was happening. And it was only... You've seen this before. This is a recording of precisely what happened when the second tower went down. And this is from a very long distance. This camera is located on the edge of the Hudson River on the West Side Drive, up the western side of Manhattan. And
that melted the steel. As it melted the steel, shell or frame, the floors collapsed, each on the other, and down they came into rubble. 1,600 degrees or even more, that melted the steel. As it melted the steel, shell or frame,
After that, the second tower just collapsing into a pile of rubble.
Here's the AP lead out of New York. In a horrific sequence of destruction, terrorists crashed.
After that, the second tower just collapsing into a pile of rubble. After that, the second tower just collapsing into a pile of rubble.
Manhattan, where there is a great deal of activity every day. There are trading rooms. There is, as we said, an exchange. Commodities are traded there. It's an environment where there is a great deal of activity every day. There are trading rooms. There is, as we said, an exchange. Commodities are traded there. to the economy are being questioned and analyzed all around the world this evening, Matt.
And of course, we've heard that the markets here in this country were closed today. We've been told they'll be closed again tomorrow.
Exactly.
I mean, how long can we expect them to be shut down until they can get up and running again?
Well, there are so many sensitive issues to be dealt with, not the least of which will be security for the participants in those marketplaces downtown, the New York Stock Exchange being the principal exchange in Lower Manhattan. It is likely, one would assume, that because of the worry that disrupting the financial markets could be worse than letting them open up and respond to the situation, that tomorrow may be the only day on which the various exchanges are closed. That remains to be questioned and analyzed all around the world this evening, Matt.
And of course, we've heard that the markets here in this country were closed today. We've been told they'll be closed again tomorrow. I mean, how long can we expect them to be shut down until they can get up and running again?
Well, there are so many sensitive issues to be dealt with, not the least of which will be security for the participants in those marketplaces downtown, the New York Stock Exchange being the principal exchange in Lower Manhattan. It is likely, one would assume, that because of the worry that disrupting the financial markets could be worse than letting them open up and respond to the situation, that tomorrow may be the only day on which the various exchanges are closed. That remains to be.
Was literally sheaved off, and it took probably about another 30 seconds before the skeleton collapsed into the street. That was the last we saw of the World Trade Center, and that was maybe 10 minutes ago when that final skeleton, the metal skeleton, steel skeleton, collapsed into the street.
That was NBC's Pat Dawson again. He's standing about 10 blocks from where the World Trade Center towers used to stand.
Another 30 seconds before the skeleton collapsed into the street. That was the last we saw of the World Trade Center, and that was maybe 10 minutes ago when that final skeleton, the metal skeleton, steel skeleton, collapsed into the street.
In that kind of collapse of steel, concrete, electrical circuitry, and glass. It created a kind of tornado effect in the canyons of Manhattan. A number of the NBC News correspondents were trapped, many of them in grave danger, as well as a lot of rescue.
Notwithstanding tower number one, we saw some kind of explosion, a lot of smoke come out of the top of the tower, and then it collapsed down onto the streets below, much like we saw the first tower just about a half hour ago.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. Get out of here! Give him in. Give him in. You can walk. You can film it. You can. Make a hole! Make a fucking hole! Make a fucking hole!
Airplane chairs, you know, over the place. That was
really?
Unusual,
yes. At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandelier shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last. And all I could think of was just to get away from there, to get to safety. And as I kept walking to Canal Street, I could hear yet another explosion behind me. It was truly one of the most frightening moments I've ever lived through.
Not only the rubble of the two tall towers this morning that were blasted.
There's all these noises. I don't know what it is. No one can go in to get the people out. There's small explosions still going on. Yeah. Did we just heard another explosion?
Go again. Another one. Hours after the attack, many smaller explosions rumbled through downtown.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
Right now.
You gotta get back from here. I know that. You're all right. Get back. All right. Don't worry about me. You need to make calls right now.
And we had some time to get some of the people out, but then it was those secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses. So I don't know how many people were in there. I know there was a lot of firefighters, a lot of public safety personnel were in there.
Well, luckily the door opened
And the Secret Service policeman them was right on B4 level, the parking lot. I says, listen, my ankle is broke. They says, okay, lay down. And they put me to lay down, and one Secret Service got something and wrapped my leg. And the next guy brought his van, put me in the van, and was bringing me out to get an ambulance. But unfortunately, no ambulance was available. So he says, what we going to do? So as he says that, that's when the other plane hit the second tower.
Dr. Tony Daher. He and his partner, Dr. Lincoln Cleveland, are emergency room physicians from New York University Hospital downtown.
We saw all our casualties yesterday at our hospital stopped at about noon.
It got really strange and very spooky. Things just stopped coming in that had anything to do with the blast. And you know, at the time, I was thinking, you can read a couple things into that. Either people are buried and they're going to start bringing bodies out, or just everybody died.
Where are all the people who were in these buildings?
The buildings were built, the structural support of the building is the shell, is the skin of the building. I remember when they were built. I'm a New Yorker. The innovative architecture of it is that the outer shell is where the strength of it is. And I think what happened is the whole thing imploded. It was like a chute that went straight down.
What does that mean to the inside?
It means that the explosion has nowhere to go except down. I think another building collapses, there's toppling, pieces fall off, there's a diffusion of the energy, and in this collapse, the energy all went straight down. And I think that, tragically, anybody in that chute did not survive. I think it probably had the force of close to a nuclear blast.
These firemen from Brooklyn have been taking the mountain down piece by piece, and many of them share the pessimism of the doctors.
It's what? It's just huge rubble.
Do you see anything of the victims, of the people who were in the building?
You've got 110 stories on top of everybody over there. It's just tough to say.
110 stories on top of everybody.
That's what the two buildings were.
We got a shot, you see the antenna that was on top of the tower. It's at ground level.
And yet there are no people to be seen.
They pulled out a couple of Port Authority cops alive.
Last night,
this morning. Supposedly they were like on the 80th floor from what we heard. But that's it so far.
I was here when they extricated the police officer at 8 o'clock this morning, who was in very good shape, actually, amazingly enough. I think right now it's just going to be a very slow process of digging through rubble.
You know, doctor, it seems to me that it must be very frustrating to be a physician and to have really so few patients to treat here.
You know, I don't know the numbers yet, but I certainly hope that means that a lot of people made it out alive. And obviously, it's horrific and incredible tragedy for those people who lost their lives.
What do you make of this?
Words fail. Words fail.
It must be frustrating as a nurse to have so many victims here.
Yeah.
And you can't get to them, and you can't help them.
Dr. Anthony Gagliardi says it's just scratching the surface.
Most of what we've seen have been, in fact, the rescue effort workers and not necessarily the primary victims who were already in the building.
So we had the unenviable position of having too many doctors. There were too many doctors and not enough patients.
First few floors is kind of still intact. So I'm hoping that most people undergrade, well, there might be a lot of voids, but unfortunately most people that were above the first few floors, very little hope as far as I know.
Seeing the buildings come down, I was expecting an enormous number of casualties, and it is striking how few injured people there actually were.
What exactly have you been doing, Jerry?
Working through the rubble, assisting rescuers up at the first tower, and just removing rubble, concrete, steel, anything in the way, trying to look for people that are alive, any bodies.
Why don't you try and describe the scene there at Ground Zero where the World Trade Center was?
It's devastating there. It's just twisted metal. It just looked like there was a giant explosion. There's just concrete laying everywhere, twisted metal. Nothing's normal there. Everything is just blown apart.
And there have been some rescues, but you haven't found many bodies, have you?
That's correct.
Do you have any idea why?
No, not right now.
One of the New York authorities actually pulled out from underneath the rubble. We believe they were trapped in an air pocket, but nothing more this morning. And in fact, what is strange really is the lack of people in hospital, considering we've only got a few hundred, considering how many people were in those buildings.
But this morning's statistics threaten to overwhelm the flickering hopes of finding many alive amidst the tons of debris. New York Mayor Giuliani.
We now have a count of 94 bodies that have been recovered, 46 of which have been identified. We have the gruesome and horrible situation that in many cases we recover only parts of bodies, and we have 70 in that category.
I mean, a police officer that I was talking to, he was bagging and tagging fingers and hands, just taking fingerprints. Is this one person? Is this two people? I mean, is this three people? And I mean, the guy's like, these are our own, man. I mean, you know, what are we going to do?
The search for bodies and the search for clues.
The EPA did find spotty levels of asbestos. A sample on a police car turned out dangerous. Another sample a couple of blocks away, not dangerous. But most interesting, in the mix, they are looking, they think, at specks of steel that used to be beams and elevators, marble from the lobby floor and facings. So what were once the strongest architectural elements in the two towers were pulverized, large portions turned into clouds like this one. Still, there is this mystery. If some of the hardest materials were vaporized, how to account for the presence everywhere of paper? Fully intact letters, business forms, stationery. Paper is so fragile and combustible, and yet somehow, maybe because we have so much of it, it was everywhere.
For example, is significant that it will help keep these visions, these images in people's minds for the days to come. That also leads to a lot of the anxiety. The things that we would see initially are people having difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, feeling sadder than usual. Those are the kind of things that we see initially. Most people will get better from that. But we do know from what's happened before in Oklahoma City, in other natural disasters outside and inside of this country, that the sooner people are able to talk about it, and especially the trained mental hygiene workers, the better their prognosis is and the less severe the symptomatology will be.
Is it normal, doctor, for people to experience some unrealistic fears right now, whether it be about planes or tall buildings or something like that?
Absolutely. It's very easy for the events to kind of mushroom out of proportion. We have people here that came that we were trying to get in an elevator to go upstairs to one of our other counseling centers, and most people refuse to get in an elevator. That's an example of a kind of a cross-pollination, if you will, of all these stressors. Everything is going to become stressful to a lot of people in New York City for the next few days until there's some more stability and a sense that normalcy is returning.
Just in dealing with the people that I've come in contact with, I notice a lot of people whose moods are fluctuating somewhat wildly. I mean, at what point do you look at someone and say, okay, they're just obviously under a lot of stress, and when do you cross the line and say someone may need professional help?
That's an interesting question, because I think right now everyone needs professional help. Everyone that was involved, everyone who's had family involved, everyone who's seen the carnage on TV, the people jumping from burning buildings. I think all of those people need to be debriefed, if you will, in some way. Usually those things will get better as we get further away from the traumatic event. The people that will need intense treatment are the people that don't get better after several weeks, after several months. And there will be a small percentage of people that will have symptoms that increase. With the last World Trade Center bombing back in the mid-90s, we had people complaining of symptoms related to the event a year after the event was over.
Right after the initial planes went into the World Trade Center, they are missing and presumed to be dead tonight. We do not know how many people are still trapped in the rubble of those two 110-story buildings that came down, nor do we know the exact death toll for that matter.
They're both down now. It's just a huge cloud of smoke.
People who have been right down next to the base of what was the trade towers say there's virtually nothing left, maybe a few flights of stairs, a few stories of one of the buildings, but that when they came down there was so much melting and so much demolishing of any kind of structure that they cannot imagine much being left or much hope of finding anybody alive. But we had ABC crews come back just in the last few minutes, including correspondent Don Daler, telling us there are still flames coming out of the base of the trade towers. They're pouring water onto it, trying to get the trade towers themselves cooled down enough to move into the very center of it.
Ankle deep in debris and despair, rescue workers waited. Some had relatives of their own inside. One police officer told me her sister worked here on the 40th floor, due in at 9 a.m. She was always early, she said. Always.
A ruin. Countless souls crushed beneath. Some of them, we're told, were on the phone, saying farewell to their families as the building burned. Some of them, the firefighters, the police. There, not by order, but by spirit.
Set up in this huge sports complex, as close as you can reasonably get to the World Trade Center. It's very close indeed on the West Side Highway. That skeleton of the front facade of the lower part of one of the trade centers, and we've seen this many times, this horrendous.
You know the sophistication of the National Security Agency and their ability to intercept communications worldwide, and they zero in, they target bin Laden's operation routinely. They picked up intercepts with some members of his organization apparently referring to these targets having been hit. They've been successful in the past building cases against bin Laden by picking up this kind of information, these kinds of communications. They also believe that at least one person on one of the 4 doomed flights may have been a member of his organization. So as disastrous as this is, they will have leads from people checking into airports.
Are you picking up anything about sending emissaries around the world in an effort to build what has been described as an extraordinary coalition of people to try to build an alliance against the idea of terrorism?
And nothing at this time, though.
Yeah.
You said the rubble. If you give me some idea of the rubble, how big it is, how much there is. I mean, the thought of 100
blocks. It's a 40-story building, and both World Trade Centers and all the little buildings that were surrounding. It's just blocks of rubble. There's no way to describe it unless you're actually up there looking at it.
Responses that we've seen in the past. This is not going to be a single salvo of cruise missiles, but rather the beginning of an ongoing campaign. On Normandy beaches here, there's not going to be eventually anybody that steps out on the decks of a battleship and signs a surrender.
But is there going to be a scene like the one we're looking at now, this utter destruction of what amounts to a World War III scene in someone else's country?
Probably not, nor do I think that
much of a hand to lend because most of the people were buried.
And does that appear to continue to be the situation tonight?
Yeah, I think yesterday as the casualties started coming into the hospital, there was pretty much a steady flow at the early part of the day, around noon, 1, 2, 3 o'clock, and then it started to tail off.
It was amazing to see, and while you think you should turn away and escape, I think everybody was just frozen and watching. There was a lot of crying. I think a lot of people were extremely disturbed, but very few people left the scene. The other thing that was quite disturbing, I think no one, including myself, questioned the integrity and the strength of both the buildings that collapsed.
Which building is that? They said, you know, I don't even think we know which one is which. But you can see the intensity of the wreckage here and the smoke still rising.
And this is not to denigrate anybody involved with airport security, but let's face it, it was pretty much a kiss-off by the airlines and everybody else. Now, there have been various calls for federal agencies to take over the security of U.S. airports. After all, these airports belong to the people of the United States, not to the airlines. Whether that will go anywhere, I don't know. We did have sky marshals for a while in the late 70s on into the 1980s. They were done away with. My assumption is, Anthony Mason helped me, that one reason we did away with them was a matter of budget, of money.
Well, I don't recall the reason myself, Dan, but I mean, anybody who's been through an airport knows the security isn't as stringent.
Working in teams of 2, rescuers have been clambering through the wreckage. 6,000 tons of rubble have been removed, every ounce to be sifted by the FBI for criminal evidence. Dogs are used to search for human signs.
Finally, whoever planned this attack knew a decisive detail about the physics of tall buildings.
The energy required to bring it down is already stored in the structure in the form of potential energy. All the energy used to raise those construction materials into place in the late 60s and early 70s when they built the structure is there if you could just find a way to release it and let gravity take over.
Marc Loiseau is president of a company called Controlled Demolition. Release a building's stored energy, he says, its collapse becomes a matter not of terrorism, but the laws of physics.
You don't have to go to the top floor. You can go almost anywhere in the structure. You don't have to go to the top floor. You can go almost anywhere in the structure, and given the right circumstances, you can release all of that stored energy, converting it into what is called kinetic energy. That's energy in motion, and that's what brings the building down.
Yet the impact of the planes alone did not cause that failure. In fact, tall building designers try to anticipate air accidents.
When this structure was designed, it was designed, to the best of my understanding, to take the impact of what was then the state-of-the-art airplane being used in our country, the Boeing 707. And if you noticed that when the planes impacted Towers 1 and Tower 2, the structure stood.
As time progressed, what was clear to anyone in New York City or to the millions of people watching the horror unfold on television, fire was engulfing the building. The worst enemy of a steel-reinforced structure is heat, extreme heat. Physics professor and explosives expert Van Romero.
At what point was there no chance of survival, do you think?
Once the fire starts inside the building, once the building structure itself, the materials inside that building start to burn, it can race through the building faster than you can run.
Engineers suspect the temperatures inside the crash areas could have quickly reached well over 1,000 degrees, perhaps approaching 2,000 degrees, beyond the melting point of any steel. The heat would have obliterated the insulation around the structure, the fire suppression system. Once this happened, nothing could save the Twin Towers.
When the plane hits the building, the kinetic energy, if you will, or the momentum of the plane hitting the building is actually pretty small compared to the fuel. When the fuel explodes from the jet fuel that's on the airplane, that can really have much more devastating effect on the building itself.
When the World Trade Center was built in the 1960s, its soaring steel columns made it like nothing constructed before. Huge prefabricated sections were hoisted into position as the towers grew higher at an impressive pace.
In retrospect, would it have been different had there been more supporting beams in a greater area around this building?
Well, frankly, it's hard to imagine a building having more steel than this structure.
The innovative design was like a square donut. The strength was in the steel columns of the outer walls and the steel of the central core. At the beginning, the towers seemed incredibly stable, each apparently absorbing the impact of a Boeing 767 traveling at close to 500 miles an hour. The explosion of jet fuel that followed was the equivalent of a massive bomb, says physics professor Stephen Block.
The energy in a fully laden 767 is nearly equal to a kiloton of TNT being exploded. The energy in a fully laden 767 is nearly equal to a kiloton of TNT being exploded. This is a staggering amount of energy, and it's equivalent, roughly speaking, to about a 20th of the energy that was deposited in the bomb that leveled Hiroshima.
But still, the towers stood. The blazing jet fuel, however, created fires burning hot enough to weaken the steel that held the World Trade Center high.
Wasn't the shaking? It was fire.
It was definitely the fire that took the building down.
As the fire burned on, experts say, temperatures rose above 1,000 degrees to the point where steel loses its strength.
Once it began to fail, it dragged in the floors and proceeded to pancake floor by floor so that the entire building collapsed, which was not necessary.
My question, did you know how vulnerable the building was?
Well, first of all, there's a couple of points. One, to put it in perspective, the engineering work was done about 35 years ago.
So you're not old enough to have designed that building.
No, I was in the 6th grade when the engineering work was done.
But you were a very precocious 6th grader, obviously.
Actually, it's interesting.
Redesign.
It's interesting because the World Trade Center towers and what they represented was one of the reasons that I went into structural engineering. My partner, Ron Klemenzik, and I, we have fielded over 60 interviews about the World Trade Center, and the question hasn't been right yet. The question has always been, why did the buildings fall down? And in fact, the question should have been, why did they stand up?
Well, let me get to that. I'm sorry, let me get to that, and I know you want to answer that. But what is so amazing to me, and maybe we get at this issue by doing it this way, what is amazing to me is how orderly was the collapse of the building. Now, when you look at the World Trade Center as it existed before we lost it, what strikes you always when you look at it is the incredible power of the vertical lines in that building, the magnificent vertical pieces of steel that went up. And what strikes me is how well they held, because the building really fell when it went and could not withstand the kind of heat that it did. It really fell right within the parameters of those vertical pieces of steel.
Well, that's exactly right. And the interesting point is, and what a lot of these emails were saying, is that basically 99% of the buildings in our country would have fallen immediately if they had been hit by a 767. And this building was able to stand, both towers actually were able to stand for about an hour after a direct hit. And I mean, this was engineering work done long before I was an engineer.
Why did it happen?
Well, both of the towers actually survived the initial impact from the airplanes, and they stood for about an hour. It was only when they finally were consumed by the fire from the jet fuel that they did collapse.
Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. It wasn't the impact of the aircrafts on the structure of the building that caused them to collapse. It was the subsequent events, mostly the aviation fuel that exploded?
That's right. The structure was able to survive for at least another hour after the actual impact. When structural steel gets up to about 1,500 to 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, it loses its strength. It loses its ability to carry load.
Fascinating. When I was much younger, this is in the 1940s, I think, a plane rammed the Empire State Building. I don't know whether you recall that or not.
Yes.
You being much younger, you must know about it. But the Empire State Building seemed to absorb that airplane crash, fuel and all. Help us understand the difference.
Right. We're talking about a significant difference in the quantity of the fuel that was on board. These were large, fully loaded jets. Back then, that was a much, much smaller jet. And both the buildings did survive the impact of the plane. And it was only this jet fuel fire that brought about the demise of the building.
The Twin Towers, the World Trade Centers, that could not be destroyed by the impact of the aircraft, but could be destroyed and were destroyed by the fact that this aviation fuel got loose and just, in effect, melted the steel.
Right.
The plane came through, it took out a few of the exterior columns of the building, and then set off this massive fire with the jet fuel. And fortunately, because of the perimeter tube system of the building, it was able to withstand the initial impact and allow a lot of people to get out.
1,600 degrees or even more, that melted the steel. As it melted the steel, shell or frame.
A double support system that withstood the crash, but not the raging jet fuel fire.
When the intense fire started, when these two large commercial aircraft went into these planes, caused such fire, aided by aviation fuel, so that the steel simply couldn't stand it, melted, collapsed on itself, and then simply collapsed floor by floor down to the bottom.
Office of Emergency Management, or 7 World Trade Center, was on the north side. The World Trade Center, the two towers sat in the middle.
That had been hijacked and their destinations were uncertain at that time. This is a live picture of Lower Manhattan, missing two of its most familiar profiles, obviously. The twin trade towers of the World Trade Center, iconic buildings here in New York, really representing, symbolic, if you will, of the enormous economic strength of this country. They sustained an attack in 1993. They were reopened. The country came back from that, and we went about our merry way again, thinking that in Fortress America this couldn't possibly happen. But of course it has. Neil Livingston is one of the most widely recognized experts on international terrorism. Mr. Livingston, we keep coming back to the same issue. This was a very sophisticated attack. This was not just a lone suicide bomber of some kind. 4 hijacking simultaneously.
The next probably couple of months, 2 months or so. This is the scene in Lower Manhattan. As we say, you're watching continuing CBS News coverage.
It's strange because my building, tower number 1, was the first to be struck. It was the second of the 2 to collapse. I had been out on the street not even a minute. I had made my way 1 block over to not so much the outside office areas of the side that I was on. And then we made our way to the stairwell and in a very orderly fashion made our way down 81 flights.
Was there a check? I mean, was it, you know, Fred, are you here? Bill, are you here? Mary, are you here?
Yes, but it was almost useless to really account for everybody not knowing what was going on, who could have been in the bathrooms. Luckily,
have a strong degree of probability that it's bin Laden, but I think you have to recognize that we are part of a world community, and we have to make sure that before we go out and do something, and I agree with you, if we get the persuasive evidence that we all believe is coming in, that we should have a proportionate response. But nevertheless, we also have to recognize that we have allies in the Middle East, we have allies in Europe, that we
Name one that would argue without responding today without even asking them. Name one.
I think the Egyptians, I think the Saudi Arabians. But
the
look,
Saudi Arabians, whose riches depend on us, would be angry for us for
not put those rescue workers into danger themselves. So that is obviously the problem. We were told by a couple of people that were in there before rescue workers that there are bodies, a number of bodies lying around in the debris and on the street there. Obviously, part of the job will be to bring them out. We are also told by Port Authority officials that the building over there, which is building number 7, which you can see, that there is some concern on the part of Port Authority officials about the stability of that building at this point.
Capability for such a huge operation. Many world governments have ordered defense alerts and called emergency security meetings. In Moscow, President Vladimir Putin.
Through the day, an inferno raged in World Trade Center building number 7, another massive office tower. Firefighters feared that it would collapse.
Stand back, stay as close as you can where you're not in the way.
But for hours, they stood cut off from the rubble, feeling both fierce and helpless because they were not allowed into the rescue area. In the midst of a frustrating afternoon, evidence of why they had not been sent in. Number 7 World Trade Center collapsed.
You guys have been doing this to me all day. Let's just wait a couple minutes. It's not going to make 7 was empty.
Okay, somebody might have been pulled out. Somebody else might have died, but at least we would have had a shot at pulling somebody out who just died.
We don't make those decisions.
Right.
Workers were moving cautiously toward the building.
You hear that?
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down.
Closer to the building, it was almost like nighttime. What was left of the building was a fiery hulk. The firefighters thought it might collapse. Pieces of the building kept falling.
The building is about to blow up. Moving back.
Rescue workers pushed people away from the scene.
We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up. On flame. Debris coming down.
Just to rehydrate so they can return to the parched canyon.
Building's going to collapse. Nothing information.
And it's always dangerous.
Building's going to collapse. Nothing information. Building's going to collapse. Nothing information. Building's going to collapse. Nothing information.
And then late afternoon, 5 p.m., still another building collapses. 7 World Trade Center, ruined by falling debris from the Twin Towers.
That's, Peter, it was an astonishing thing because the civilians who were standing around here were all amazed, but things have become so bizarre down here that the hundreds of firemen who were standing around looked at it, felt a bit shocked, but then just said, well, we're going to have even more work to do. Associate producer Lucy Kerrigan had been over near that building just a little bit earlier, and the policeman had told her that they feared the building was going to come down, that they were evacuating people from around it.
Thank you, Bill. Just we just stay with this photograph for this graphic for just a second. Well, no, there's number 7 coming down. When you think that part of the component of news coverage around the country every year is the excitement and the fun that people get watching an old building being demolished, and they wire it very carefully for days, and it's a very careful operation in order to make sure that a building comes down safely. I think the last one we saw was when they brought down one of the old casinos in Las Vegas. I mean, this is just stunning to see these things come down inside. In the case of the north and south towers there of the World Trade Center, you know, come down within a couple of hours as a result of the structural damage, weakening that was done when these aircraft hit them. And now number 7, the World Trade Center, which is 47 stories tall.
It's our understanding that that building had been evacuated when the collapse occurred.
This was known as Building 7 of the World Trade Center, and that is fresh video you're looking at of that coming down.
Now, again, they were able to get everybody out of that building before it collapsed. So I don't know whether it was accomplished by demolition experts or whether it just happened as a consequence of what occurred earlier today. Understanding that that building had been evacuated when the collapse occurred.
This was known as Building 7 of the World Trade Center, and that is fresh video you're looking at of that.
When the collapse occurred.
This was known as Building 7 of the World Trade Center, and that is fresh video you're looking at.
For Ann Wilson, yesterday's attacks brought back horrible memories from her childhood.
I grew up in England. I was in the Blitz during the war, and when I saw the devastation.
Certainly number 7 that just went down as we were live on the air earlier on with MSNBC was cleared out. Most people, they said earlier that they were just waiting for that building to go down, so they were expecting this to happen. Not only that, it is still an awesome sight when this happens.
Spoke of inhuman attacks. The British Prime Minister Tony Blair spoke of a battle between the democratic world and terrorism.
When I was directing traffic at the intersection of Northmore and Greenwich, there was a Lieutenant John Wolfe, Manhattan South Task Force commander there, and he went over to a civil engineer and said, when number 7 World Trade Center goes, are we going to be safe here? We were 6 or 7 blocks away. And the civil engineer looked and said, I think so.
So we're talking about 10 blocks. When the towers came down,
yeah,
like I say, they basically crumbled into themselves.
Yeah.
Did they knock over any other structures, smaller structures, brownstones, stores?
That I can tell you from having been there afterwards, not as much as you would have thought.
One of the things that I think is awfully hard. Give me a sense, just your best guess of how many people were in that area where you were. Are we talking hundreds of people? These are rescue workers, firefighters, police officers, and the rest?
Several thousand.
Several thousand people.
By the time we left, several thousand people were there helping.
And when you got there at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I realized the last thing you were doing when you arrived at 2 o'clock in the morning was counting the number of people around you.
Are as he put it, quote, a part of a very heavy focus by the FBI, being looked at as suspect. White shirt, they both had black hair. As he described them, they weren't really light complected. Evidently, but what happened was they did impound the car. They took photos of it. It was impounded overnight by the state police and taken to the Maine State Police Crime Lab in Augusta, where it's being held for the FBI. Now, Chief Chitwood did say, gave you some sort of description. He said that
you can be a lot more careful about who you let on a plane. You can be a lot more careful about what kind of blades are allowed. You can be a lot more intelligent about using spies. We know that. We've said it overnight. We know what needs to be done. What was lacking was the will to do it politically, because you didn't need to do it. Now you do.
The collapse of 7 World Trade Center, the building they were so worried about injuring rescue workers, has freed up rescue workers to now go into the area, and they are moving in groups of 20 and 50 as their teams are designated.
So the principal danger to the rescue and recovery teams has been eliminated.
The biggest danger has literally removed itself.
Right.
Let's now go live to New York City, where our correspondent Jane Stanley now joins me. Jane, we can see behind you those plumes of smoke still rising from the World Trade Center, what's left of it.
It never seemed real that something like this could develop and they could watch it happening on their television screens, as is what happened today.
Well, Jane Stanley, thanks for joining us live from South Manhattan. You can see in the background behind Jane there what's left of the World Trade Center, the smoke, the dust, the rubble burning. And Jane, let's talk about the human side. You live in New York with our BBC colleagues. You're one of, what, 10 or 11 million people. What about the people around you you've seen?
The 47-story Salomon Brothers building, situated very close to the World Trade Center, has also just collapsed. And part of the defense... Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense downtown in New York behind me, down by the World Trade Centers, of just an area completely closed off as the rescue workers try to do their job. But this isn't the first building that has suffered as a result. We know that part of the Marriott Hotel next to the World Trade Center also collapsed as a result of this huge amount of falling debris from 110 floors of the two twin towers of the World Trade Center. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because this whole downtown area behind me has been completely sealed off.
Talking yet about revenge and what the government should do to counter this threat, or are they numbed still?
I think people are still numb, and I don't think people are talking about revenge in that way at all yet. I think people are still too traumatized. We don't know how many people have been killed. We can't even put a figure. I think when you talk to people on they daren't even say how many people might have been killed and injured. And I think that feeling, until idea of the devastation, people don't really know what to say or what to think. I think they feel the bubble of their security as being in America has definitely been popped. This city and this country will not be the same, but they don't really know where to turn. That's the very sad thing. I think there's going to be a lot of very, very traumatized people that has hit them very, very hard.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan. Perhaps we can rejoin her and follow that up later. Across America, citizens... Now, if you're just joining us, let's recap on today's catastrophic events. We've just got some pictures in from New York of the latest building to collapse. That's the Salomon Brothers building. That's 47 stories tall. There you can see it going. That's 47 stories tall. There you can see it going.
One eyewitness, and only one so far, is quoted as saying he thinks, I put that in quotation marks, he thinks a plane crashed into the Pentagon. But there'll be rumors all day, and we're going to try to separate the rumors from the facts.
Well, we know there were large number, many dozens, in the aircraft that flew at full power, steering directly into between, I think, the first and second floor of the opposite the helipad.
In the first official estimate, Pentagon officials say 126 military and civilian employees died on Tuesday. The highest-ranking casualty
activated a crisis team in response to the World Trade Center attack.
Oh, absolutely, we're part of it. Part of our county government response is to make sure we provide whatever support we can to New York City and to the district and to Arlington. And we've got our firefighters in the district now working with D.C. We've got people that we sent, firefighters we sent to the Pentagon. Our urban search and rescue team is actually working at the Pentagon now. And we got a call from New York saying they needed some public safety radios that we had a good supply of locations set up. So as soon as we do that, we'll let people know that as well. But we're just, just very, very concerned for the victims and their families. And
the Japanese never declared war on us. It was a surprise. He declared war on the United States 2 years ago.
We're getting from the Pentagon as they continue to try to get that fire knocked down. Of course, the big concern of the number of people who have been injured by that incident that took place earlier today.
Immediately, we saw a lot of military police and police getting involved, and we didn't know if they're going to have other explosions or after the third one happened.
You've had some hours now since that took place, Aziz. Tell me what you're feeling now about this whole thing.
I'm still nervous. I cannot believe my eyes that I saw that.
What about the entire series of incidents?
When a hijacked American Airlines 757 plowed into the side of the building, penetrated 3 of the 5 rings of hallways that form the Pentagon's unique structure.
That will lead us in a certain direction. And then they will go back to the database of threat warnings that they've had in the recent past. The U.S. has had a worldwide terrorism alert for some time that was just renewed yesterday.
Because firefighters say that they have not encountered any survivors in the rubble since the initial attack yesterday morning. Regardless, Tracy says she will remain, for now, optimistic.
In the dark.
As defense officials try to account for those missing or dead, despite the damage left behind, officials promise the Pentagon that as states of emergency are declared in Maryland, the district, and here in Virginia.
The White House was evacuated, and there was what looked like an attack on the State Department, which runs American foreign policy.
Markings crashed into the west side of the Pentagon near the heliport.
This is a live picture we're just getting here. This is the firefighters battling the blaze at the Pentagon. Look.
So you can see the damage.
This is just going to be raw tape that Dave Statter and his crew are
just feeding into us.
You can see this apparent terrorist attack. A jet slammed into the Pentagon about 15-20 minutes ago, the helipad side on 395. We have no word yet on casualties. The Pentagon has been evacuated, as has the White House and the U.S. Capitol building at Blair Mansion.
Before this happened at the Pentagon, President Bush went on the air to talk about the response, the U.S. response, in light of the World Trade Center. But again, this is what happened right after he said we were going to hunt down the folks responsible for the apparent terrorist attack in New York City. And shortly after that, this is what happened at the Pentagon in Arlington. We're just getting across the wires in Los Angeles. Police departments there are on tactical alert, but there have been no threats in Los Angeles.
That was my first feeling, and I was thinking it was the last day of my life there. And just the way how I looked at the airplane, looked like the end or the rear of the airplane going to land it in my car.
Hey, did you have any news radio on or anything? Were you aware of what had taken place in New York?
Matter of fact, I was listening to the news at that time.
Witnesses describe seeing an enormous fireball. Then heavy black smoke rose into the sky.
You are looking at the Tower 2, the first one. This is all New York now.
Michael, if you can hear me, we just heard another explosion down at the Pentagon building. We just heard another loud explosion down at the Pentagon building just seconds ago.
Tower 2, the first one. This is all New York now.
The Associated Press is quoting witnesses as saying, They
could say was responsible for it and who's since been charged in it. In this case, I think this ratchets up.
Excuse me. This is the Pentagon we're looking at now, according to my monitor.
I've seen the World Trade Tower on the Colonel's TV, and I just said to myself, thank God I work at the Pentagon. Nothing like that would happen. And from behind me, it came an explosion. It threw me probably, I estimate, 80 feet or so.
What did you do? We were told you managed to get to a closet of some kind.
Yes, there was some kind of closet. It threw me into this closet, and I don't know why the door was open, because it's never open. And I felt my way.
Because he's got the resources, he's got the know-how, and he has mentioned that he has got a personal holy war against the United States.
I want to let you know that as far as the federal government is concerned, they are trying to get the country's transportation systems back up and running. They're talking about the rail system, highways, certainly all of the airports. Unprecedented today to have all of the country's airports grounded. No flights taking off or landing, to have our international flights redirected to Canada. But what they are telling us now is that they are trying very hard, this is coming from Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta, to have things back up and running at least sometime afternoon tomorrow. As you know, there are some areas of transportation that have been able to reopen, like Amtrak and Union Station. Additional air defense for Washington and for New York. And as you know, there are warships that are now headed toward the harbor in New York as additional backup as well.
You know, when it comes to trying to track down who is responsible for this, obviously very early.
Firefighters, EMS workers, police officers, volunteers rushing to the Pentagon in disbelief, having to face the fact that a commercial airliner loaded with passengers, crew members, and 2 pilots crashed into the Pentagon.
That timeline is still so remarkable. I mean, here the president has been told that an aircraft, a passenger plane, has been crashed into one of the World Trade Center towers. He passes the information on to reporters, and within minutes, another aircraft crashes into another tower. And before it's all over, another aircraft, yet another aircraft, has crashed into the Pentagon. And yet another aircraft, also hijacked.
To attack the leaders and the core of the group with success, but we have never before really encountered things so serious that we are on the edge of war.
And in the case of Pan Am 103, so you're really reaffirming how complicated this is.
More than that, Peter, I think the key element...
And as you can see, damage and destruction there caused by that plane. While we are not getting confirmation from American Airlines as to what plane that was, apparently FBI sources have been telling ABC.
The side of the Pentagon. Obviously, it was going in the Pentagon purposely. And we were driving down Columbia Pike, and it just flew right over us. As I said, full speed. And I told my husband, he's going in the Pentagon, he's going in the Pentagon. And then we heard the huge crash, saw this fireball and flame and...
I was up in the air traffic control tower, and the soldier went downstairs to the restroom. And I just look out the side of the building, I see a plane run right into the side of the Pentagon. And when it did, the whole ceiling and everything just fell.
It was bumper to bumper. We were all stopped. I was probably about 100 yards from the Pentagon when I heard this screaming sonic boom and saw the jet come screaming across the highway. It was an American Airlines jet, silver with the markings along the windows. And within seconds, it hit the side of the Pentagon.
Number of injured?
Have no idea at this point.
Size of plane?
According to the eyewitness, he said that it looked like a corporate jet, but I have no official word on that at this point.
Still have conflicting reports over what size plane hit. We heard one eyewitness tell us that it was a small plane that he seemed to see as he was coming across the 14th Street Bridge. Believe it or not, somebody else said they saw something as big as a 757. We just don't have the confirmation for you yet.
Well, we were on Columbia Pike where the shelter is, and all of a sudden you can hear the noise coming first, and then you can feel the shaking of the building. And we just looked up out of the window, and I saw the tail end go.
What size plane?
It was for me, it looked like a big size plane. It was definitely a passenger plane.
And we were stuck in traffic for
coming off the exit here, and I looked up and I saw this American Airlines jet coming in very low, and I watched it, and it clipped. I don't know if you can see it over here. It clipped this pole over here.
The emotion
slammed right into the building. Huge explosion.
Are you sure it was an American Airlines plane?
We were stuck in traffic, could not move. I could see the big AA, the silver jet itself. I thought it was a 737. I may be mistaken there, but there was no doubt about it. It was American Airlines slammed right into the building, and there was no doubt about it. Whoever was piloting that plane was aiming for the Pentagon.
And we do know they hit a taxi cab. The plane hit a taxi cab up here on the bridge, the overpass.
I didn't know that. I did not see. I saw the ball of fire, and I saw it clip these poles, and then the billowing smoke, a gray column of smoke, and then pandemonium. I recognized that the plane was coming in low, and I started watching it. Of course, I was listening to the radio, and I just heard the president's address about the attack in New York, and I thought it looked funny, but I didn't put two and two together, and then it sheared off the top of that pole over there, slammed into another pole, went right into the building. And I looked over to the side, and I saw this jet coming in, and it was really low, and it was an American Airlines jet. You could read the AA on the side, silver fuselage, and it kind of disappeared over this embankment here for a moment, and then huge explosion, flames flying into the air, and just chaos.
Yeah, and David Beardsley, who writes for us and who lives over near Fort Myer, not far from there, said his whole house shook. And
he actually felt it.
Yeah, and the cats scattered, he said.
Have been able at all to see the aircraft?
Well, you know, earlier today I got right up next to the building and I took a look at some of the pieces that were outside. They were only very small pieces of that American Airlines jetliner. A cockpit that was a window that was all smashed, part of the fuselage that was bent and twisted, but most of the parts of the plane are still inside the building, according to people who've been in and seen it.
Mitchell was right there. We watched it go in front of us at a distance of about 100 feet in front of us and about 20 feet over us. It appeared as if we were landing right on our roof. We looked, we watched it go into the Pentagon.
I was in the traffic on the 14th Street Bridge, right at the Pentagon, tied up going into town, and I heard this plane come over my head. It was really low.
What size plane?
It sounded like a small plane, but it was very, very low. And the next thing I know, there was this tremendous explosion as it hit the Pentagon. I looked over, and the smoke started coming up. Pieces of the plane and pieces of the Pentagon were falling onto the 14th Street, onto the Shirley Highway.
One eyewitness I talked to who was on this busy highway outside the Pentagon this morning said he saw an airplane coming directly over his head. It was an American Airlines plane. He could see the number on the plane. He could almost see the passengers inside as it went along the highway, started clipping off the high wires and the different light poles along the highway and slammed directly into the side of the Pentagon.
You gave a very clear description earlier of how this aircraft had approached the Pentagon, but did anybody able to identify it as an aircraft associated with an airline?
Absolutely, Peter. The eyewitness I talked to looked up and said it was an American Airlines plane. I saw it clear as could be. It went right over the top of my car and clipped a pole right in front of where my car was.
That was a piece of the building that had been recently finished. Apparently the new reinforcements made a difference. These red beams that were added. So they're going to have to drop this section of the building? They are. They're going to have to find a way. They've been propping up the two sides, and then they're going to have to try to take balls and break through so that it's sufficiently stable for people to go in and see that if they can recover whatever bodies are there, and then begin removing the debris. How far into here do you wander during the course of it? Oh, I've been in the lower section over there. When you come out here, what does this do to your sense of resolve? I don't know that it's there. I don't know that it changes it. It's more about the families and the people and the men and women. Let's get away from that. Yeah, let's
We walk over on the pad, I guess. So you're seeing a changing cast of characters here as the hours and the days go by.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when I first came out here, of course, there was no one here except about 6 or 8 people pulling some bodies out of the area. The people had been burned badly and injured. And there wasn't, of course, a vehicle here, except there was a fire truck over here that was on fire. It was the fire truck for this helipad that you see. And a few cars were burning, and the whole building was in flames.
The aircraft came from right over
here. From over here, hit a light.
A couple of light poles.
Yeah, and then came in about between the first and second floor over here. And it went in through 3 rings. I'm told the nose is still in there, very close to the inner courtyard, about 1 ring away.
So the flight recorder may still be in the nose, for all we know.
It's conceivable. When I came around that corner, you could see pieces way up there at the far end of the airplane.
Debris, including a chunk of the plane, was scattered across the Pentagon.
The part on the right of the hole there has already collapsed. The part on the left is sheared off, but underneath all the columns are bent. That's why we're bringing in shoring, steel and wood to shore that up. Because that part there, the fuselage is underneath the collapse, the fuselage of the aircraft. And to get that out, they're worried about this part falling on the rescue.
Did you see the aircraft come down?
No, I did not see the aircraft.
Okay. So, and how were they able to go in, the Urban Search and Rescue, with all the flames?
Well, they've only a few fire personnel have been inside the building so far. And after they confirmed that there was some people, the FBI went in with photographers.
The Pentagon site, pings have been heard from the black box of the plane that crashed into the building. 190 are believed now dead at the Pentagon.
That the blast had made.
Investigation into who caused all this continues to point toward Osama bin Laden. It also slows the hunt for the plane's cockpit voice recorder, which could answer so many questions about the final moments.
I was talking to a friend, a major friend of mine in the Army, who was calling up to ask if I had heard about the World Trade Center, and of course I did. Everybody in the Pentagon did. The whole Pentagon was abuzz that morning with the video footage of that. And she jokingly told me, you know, the Pentagon is probably next. You ought to get out of there. And we sort of chuckled about that. And she said again, I'm serious, David. You really ought to get out of there. And it was at that moment that I've described it as the gates of hell open. And frankly, that there is a vacuum that happens on impact, and the lungs, the air in my lungs were just sucked out.
Well, with me here is Derek Spector, who was actually on the first fire truck to get to the scene. You're from the Virginia Police
Arlington County
Fire Force. Could you see the plane at all?
No, not at all. It was just way too much smoke and way too much fire.
And you could see the hole, presumably, in the
there wasn't. You couldn't see the hole because of the smoke, and what you see now is actually happened approximately 15 minutes after the plane struck it. You could still see the roof line of where the plane went, the roof line of the building where the plane went in.
Did you realize it was a plane crash?
We actually realized what was going on prior to us getting here. We were dispatched on another call. And as we were getting on the rig, we heard the noise of the jets, and then we heard the explosion. And my driver, Brian Roach, said, I think a plane just hit somewhere around here.
Well, just outside this wall, they are in the process of trying to clear away the center section where the aircraft impacted and then went through 3 of the so-called rings of the Pentagon. Filled with jet fuel, spewing it everywhere and burning the entire section to the point that it collapsed. It is unimaginable to be sitting in your office and feel the entire building shake and then walk out there 3 minutes after the impact and see the devastation and the parts of airplanes spread for hundreds of feet all across the side of the building is an appalling situation.
So now, because we're not really allowed to get very close to this site, is it possible to make out the plane? I mean, are there large bits of fuselage in there?
What I saw was it was really smoky, so I couldn't see bits and pieces. I think I saw a front tire. I saw the tire of the plane, the front tire of the airplane. When we first got there, I saw a section of the fuselage that had a big C on it, and that was it. That's all I could recognize of the airplane.
Because one of the things that surprises me about the shape of this is that the wings, presumably, you'd think it would have made a slightly broader hole, given the fact of the width of the plane and the wings.
That building is solid concrete. It's a humongous structure. Like I said, I've been here 12 years and I've run hundreds of calls there, and the building is just put together so solidly, and the plane would have buckled before the building would have.
Those who have been in the courtyard have a different view of the damage.
There is a bulge in the wall. Several windows are smashed out. There's debris from the plane in the courtyard that the FBI and NTSB are marking as evidence and photographing and collecting, but there's no plane protruding through the wall.
You know that at the Pentagon today there has been a pinging from the black box on board the aircraft that slammed into the Pentagon yesterday. Have you any idea when you'll be able to get it out?
Well, it's probably in the nose, and the nose is buried well into the building, almost through the building, but not quite. It's in the third or fourth ring coming in towards the center.
We were one of the only TV crews allowed on the grounds of the Pentagon this evening. In fact, our tapes had to be reviewed by the FBI before we could show them to you this evening. We joined the Montgomery County Urban Search and Rescue Team from Rockville. That's the same team that went to the Oklahoma City bombing and rescued people in that disaster. We rode from their headquarters in Rockville in a bus and set up fort about 75 yards from the hole in the Pentagon that we have been looking at all day. There are about 30 to 40 members in this team with 3 search dogs. They go into the Pentagon for 3 hours at a time. When they come out, they tell us that they see concrete upon concrete, electrical wires everywhere, desks teetering on the edge of floors that have been blown away, and of course bodies of people who did not survive the tragedy. We did see the FBI agents bringing out bags upon bags of evidence. We saw a designated area for plane parts. There was not a piece larger than 2 feet. The Montgomery County Rescue Team has set up a fort in what has become a tent city on the grounds of the Pentagon.
Just looking at the way the structure of the building here, where it's collapsed down on a lean-to.
Got a lean-to collapse.
The shooting down of commercial aircraft that were suspected to be controlled by terrorists. Were you there when that order was given?
No, I was not. I was made aware of it during the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon. There was a young man who would come in and say to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, do the orders still stand? And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Well, at the time, I didn't know what all that meant. And
the flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Words to the firemen, to the workers, to the people who had been doing some of the more grisly work of beginning to remove the remains from the building. Today, that process really did begin. They've been tagging bodies, putting them in body bags, and
Then, at 10 a.m., news of another passenger plane in trouble. Someone on United Airlines Flight 93, traveling from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, called 911 and reported a hijacking. Then, an explosion and silence. The plane crashed here, some 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh. There were 45 people on board. From the field in western Pennsylvania, where United Airlines Flight 93 went down, short of the hijacker's intended target, news of just how tough the recovery effort will be.
But there very clearly was an order to shoot commercial aircraft.
Subsequently, I found that out.
The people who attacked the United States in New York, shot down the plane over Pennsylvania and attacked the Pentagon.
With respect to Flight 93, what type of information were you and the Vice President receiving about that flight?
The only information we had at that point was when it went into when it crashed.
I see. You didn't know beforehand about that airplane.
Did not.
And so there was no specific order there to shoot that plane down.
No, sir.
But there were military planes in the air in position to shoot down commercial aircraft.
That's right. The planes had been scrambled, I believe, from Otis at that point.
Debris here is spread over a 3 to 4 mile radius, which has now been completely sealed off and is being treated, according to the FBI, as a crime scene. Governor Tom Ridge made some remarks earlier at a press conference. He had flown over the site. He said the emergency response here was immediate. He also said, and I don't know whether or not you all are able to see pictures of this, but this is one of those cases where the pictures really do tell the story, that sort of the most horrifying aspect of this particular crash scene is how little debris is visible. There is a large crater in the ground, and I'm hoping that you all are seeing it as I'm talking about it, but that's really all you see is a large crater in the ground and just tiny, tiny bits of debris. There has been at least one report that the investigators out there, and there are hundreds of them, as I said tonight, have found nothing larger than a phone book.
Dick Cheney's moment arrived with those jetliners on September 11th.
Pentagon, the day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared war, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy. According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
Want to check in very quickly with the President of the United States, John Cochrane, who was with the President in Florida. John?
Peter, as you know, the President's down in Florida talking about education. He got up out of his hotel suite this morning, was about to leave. Reporters saw the White House Chief of Staff, Andy Card, whisper into his ear. Then reporters said to the President, "Do you know what's going on in New York?" He said he did, and said he will have something to say about it later. His first event is about a half an hour at an elementary school in Sarasota, Florida.
Thanks, John. John Cochrane with the President. President's in Florida today pushing his education reform. It will get wiped off the agenda today.
The President himself was hundreds of miles away in Florida, about to talk to some school children, when his Chief of Staff, Andrew Card, whispered the news to him.
You know, you can tell a lot from science.
I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And it said it must have been a horrible accident. But I was whisked off there. I didn't have much time to think.
Let me condition the press this way. Any sources and methods of intelligence will remain guarded in secret. My administration will not talk about how we gather intelligence, if we gather intelligence, and what the intelligence says.
Charlie. Mr. Secretary, did you have any inkling at all, in any way, that something of this nature and something of this scope might be planned?
Charlie, we don't discuss intelligence matters.
Mr. Secretary, what do you say to the American people who may have questions on how something so coordinated has been carried out against this nation? What do you say to them who might not have confidence that our intelligence and our security are what they should be?
I say to them that the President of the United States will be making some remarks to them this evening that will address those subjects.
Speaking of formal declaration.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Please. Formally, thank you, sir. Thank you. Everyone who's stepped out. Thank you all. Thank you all. We'll take lights, please. Thanks.
The President certainly does not want to answer questions at the moment, nor want to be committed to anything beyond his prepared remarks. There you see the Secretary of Defense is there. This is small. There's the Attorney General right beside the Secretary of Defense.
Anyone looking at the attack today can see that it was well organized, well financed, and vicious.
we currently know, the estimate that's been widely reported is considerably high, and we certainly pray that that's the case.
But you always have to be careful. Those who are doing the briefings may have an agenda of their own within the government trying to build pressure for an action they want.
It is indeed an attack on a way of life, because the purpose of terrorism is to terrorize. The purpose of terrorism is to terrorize. It is to alter behavior. It is to force people who believe in freedom to be less free.
Well, my first thought is with the tremendous casualties, and the death toll is just overwhelming. It's a day that 50 years from now, our children, if we're still teaching history, will be taught about.
You have mentioned in this conversation alone 3 times, and I think you mentioned it yesterday, Iraq. Why do you keep bringing up Iraq?
Because I think there has started to be some rethinking of the World Trade Center operation of 1993, mainly under the influence of a fascinating new book by Laurie Milroy called Saddam's Study of Revenge. It suggests that the Iraqi government may have been involved in the World Trade Center bombing of 93.
You say an act of war.
Yes.
Do you believe that if another country is somehow the patron of an individual or a group of individuals who has done this, we should go to war with that country?
Absolutely.
What Mr. Rumsfeld was trying to say, and that, by the way, is the President's National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice.
There are snipers up on the roofs of the White House itself, including buildings around it, and a military helicopter gunship flew over the premises not that long ago, about 15 minutes ago now, and then it circled back over toward the Pentagon, where from my location you can still see smoke coming into the sky from there. But we are told the Vice President is still in a position to monitor all this as the President makes his way back.
John, thank you. Our senior White House correspondent, John King.
And we were in a building in which we were trapped for about 10, 15 minutes.
Are you talking about did you go immediately to the Office of Emergency Management?
So I went down to the scene, and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building. So we were trapped in the building for 10, 15 minutes and finally found an exit and got out, walked north, and took a lot of people with us.
Do you know anything about the cause of the explosions that brought the 2 buildings down yet? Was it caused by the planes or by something else?
We believe that it was caused by the after effects of the planes hitting the buildings. We don't know of an additional explosion after that.
Could you tell us, do you expect any further attacks on New York? Is there anything to indicate that there could be more bombs, more planes out there? I know originally there was a report that 8 planes had been hijacked, 4 have only been accounted for. What about the remaining? And is there any possibility that there could be bombs on the ground planted by some?
We have no specific information to that effect.
Should the Congress place any limits whatsoever on President Bush's ability or determination to pursue this?
Well, Peter, there's precedent, and I haven't been around long enough to have firsthand experience.
Things we need to understand is that cowardly acts of terrorism can happen anywhere at any time.
How many associates, Mr. Mueller, do you think? And how many were workers at the airport?
I can't give you a definitive number on the associates. Thank you very much.
Joe Albaugh. Mr. Albaugh, thanks for taking time to do this. Sure. You've spent time down around the World Trade Center. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what impressed you the most. Tell me what troubled you the most.
It's a horrendous sight. I know you're trying to do justice on television with the tape, but this has had a profound effect on the president, just like it has on every American, as it should.
Many thanks, Joe Albaugh, the director of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, not under these circumstances,
Absolutely.
but it's nice to see you, Joe.
Take care.
Thank you.
But you've got a problem in this world of ours with terrorism that is, it's not unique to the Pentagon or New York. It's across the globe. There are a number of people and organizations and countries that have consciously decided to use terrorism to impose their will on others and to deny others the freedom and the ability to go about their business and live their lives. And the United States of America is a free country where everything about us is that everyone can do what they wish and go where they wish and think what they wish and say what they wish. And the purpose of terrorism is to terrorize people. It's to prevent people from having that freedom and to prevent people from being able to enjoy their lives and be free of the others imposing their will on them. So it really strikes very much at the whole heart of our country.
We should be mindful that these were not the acts of all Muslims who, like Christians and Jews, believe in a God of love and mercy. Rather, these were senseless murders committed by religious extremists who kill out of hate.
Some of them are just simply evil people.
The families, the children, I'm a loving guy. Will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
Thank you. We currently believe and are certainly hopeful that the number of casualties being reported in the press is high.
The casualty figure you referred to, I assume, is the 800 number that was provided by the Arlington County Fire Department.
It is.
And you say it's considerably high. We've heard from the military service.
I hope and pray that it is. And I want to thank Senator Chairman Levin and Senator Warner and certainly Secretary of the Army White and General Shelton for being here with me. And we'll excuse ourselves. Thank you.
And whoever hosts them or directly or indirectly support them should be automatically isolated from the community and family of nations. This is the only way. Without this clarity of purpose, there will be no world order, no world order possible, period.
It's not just simply a matter of capturing people and holding them accountable, but removing the sanctuaries, removing the support systems, ending states who sponsor terrorism.
Ending states who sponsor terrorism means taking on not just Afghanistan, but countries like Iran and Iraq. And the cost will be astronomical.
I think it's important to recognize that all this new internet technology that you guys know so much about.
Even before 9/11, Dick Cheney was insistent the U.S. must invade Iraq and begin changing the world.
Just go in, it's going to roll over. They believe this. They believe this. Utopian, idealist, crazy.